Why do some of us learn to abandon our own needs in order to feel safe? Why does self-reliance become a survival strategy? And what can astrology show us about this pattern? So in this video, we'll be exploring hyper-independence through the lens of astrology, looking at the archetypes of overfunctioning, Saturn's role in trauma, and how astrology reflects this psychological pattern. So if you've ever wondered about the astrology of hyper-independence, take a breath, get comfortable, and let's dive in. Welcome. This is a space for curious minds, meaning seekers, and anyone drawn to the deeper layers of astrology and the human experience. In this video, we'll start by looking at hyperindependence from a psychological perspective, where it comes from and how it functions. Then we'll look at how this pattern shows up symbolically through astrology, through the archetypes of Saturn, the Stoic, Mars, the lone warrior, and the sixth house fixer. Finally, we'll look at how these archetypes point to unconscious strategies that we've come to rely on and what it might mean to recognize them with more awareness. So what is hyperindependence? Hyperindependence isn't actually a clinical diagnosis, but it is widely recognized as a coping mechanism that forms when someone learns early on that relying on others isn't safe. So they build a strategy rooted in self-sufficiency, emotional control, and the identity of being the one that holds everything together. On the surface, it can look like strength or resilience, but underneath there's often a deeper fear of abandonment, disappointment, and of not having their needs met. Over time, this can lead to burnout, isolation, and difficulty connecting in relationships. In Jungian psychology, this would be seen as a shadow expression, which is an unconscious strategy where vulnerability and connection are avoided as a way to protect against rejection, pain, and unmet needs. So let's explore this pattern through the lens of astrology and see how planetary archetypes, signs, and houses can help us understand the deeper roots of hyperindependence and how we might begin to work with it more consciously. There are so many ways that this pattern can show up in astrological symbolism, but for now we'll just focus on three of the key archetypal signatures, starting with Saturn, the Stoic. At the heart of hyperindependence is Saturn, the planet associated with restrictions, endurance, emotional repression, and karmic burdens. This is the archetype of the Stoic, the one who learned to carry responsibility early and built their self-worth around strength, structure, and self-control. In the zodiac, Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius. In Capricorn, it speaks to duty, perseverance, and survival through realism. In Aquarius, it leans towards intellectual detachment, personal boundaries, and social responsibility. Both signs carry a tone of self-sufficiency and of keeping their emotions tightly managed in service of something bigger. Saturn in Capricorn or Cancer can sometimes represent a defensive personality structure where fear of abandonment or judgment are heightened and walls are put up to avoid disappointment. When Saturn's placed in the first house of the self, the fourth house of home and family, or the 10th house of public roles and reputation, it can suggest early patterns of emotional withdrawal, internalized pressure, or having to be the adult too soon. From a symbolic perspective, this archetype reflects the internalized burden of control, where identity becomes fused with responsibility and vulnerability becomes a sign of weakness. For many with strong Saturnian signatures, self-worth is built on being reliable, composed, and in control. Needing others can feel dangerous and even shameful, so they cope by mastering their emotions, staying useful, and not asking for too much. From a symbolic or mythical view, this archetype reflects the weight of the Devil card in the tarot, where the chains are internalized. Identity becomes fused with control, and breaking free from emotional suppression requires deep self-awareness. So this is the essence of the Stoic, the one who learned to survive by staying strong, quiet, and self-contained, abandoning themselves in the process. This archetype centres around the 6th house, the place in the chart linked to labour, duty and service to others. When it's overemphasised with stelliums or key personal planets, for example, it can reflect someone who's built their identity around being useful. This is the archetype of the fixer, the one who keeps things running and who copes by doing, helping and managing. In time, this can lead to overfunctioning, where their sense of safety depends on being capable, productive and in control of the day-to-day. They rarely ask for help and often feel shame when needing anything at all. This pattern can sometimes overlap with Virgo, the sign associated with practicality and self-sufficiency. Virgo energy seeks precision, order and clarity, but when it's distorted, it can sometimes become self-sacrificing, perfectionistic or quietly controlling in the name of care. When strong personal planets are placed in the 6th house, these themes can become central to a person's sense of identity and self-worth. Chronic responsibility, burnout and internal struggles can become common side effects, especially when the pattern goes unseen. Symbolically, this archetype echoes the hermit in the tarot, the one who walks alone with purpose, but risks being cut off from support. The work becomes their identity, and their self-worth is measured by how much they can carry for others. Finally, we have the lone warrior, the archetype associated with Mars and to some extent all of the fire signs. This is someone who moves fast, acts decisively, and processes their emotion through motion. To them, stillness can feel threatening, and vulnerability can feel unsafe. Mars rules Aries, where the instinct is to act, survive, and initiate. People with strong Mars or fire signatures cope by pushing forward, staying strong, and avoid lingering in feelings that can't be solved through action. Mars in Capricorn can bring a disciplined edge to this pattern because of the fire and earth combination of strategy, endurance, and speed. So here, hyperindependence becomes a mode of leadership, and responsibility ultimately becomes a protective strategy, even if it feels like a burden. Symbolically, this archetype echoes the Emperor in the tarot, the ruler who leads not because he desires power, but because he feels that nobody else can carry the weight, assuming control as a duty, not as a preference, and in doing so feels alone at the top. So this is the essence of the lone warrior, the one who learned to survive by staying in motion and relying on no one but themselves, abandoning their needs for rest, support, and softness along the way. So if hyperindependence is a strategy we develop to feel safe, then astrology can help us understand why it formed and what it's been trying to protect. By exploring the inner Stoic, the fixer, and the lone warrior, we can start to see these patterns more clearly, how they help us and how they might be holding us back. The core thread running through all three is self-abandonment. The idea that your needs, feelings, and limits come last. Astrology can't tell us what to do, but it can mirror our deeper patterns that shape how we carry ourselves through the world. And sometimes seeing the pattern clearly is where real shifts can begin. But if any of these archetypes feel familiar to you, here is something to sit with. For the Stoic, ask yourself, when did you learn that your feelings were a problem that needed to be managed and not expressed? And what might soften in you if being vulnerable wasn't something that you needed to apologize for? For the fixer, underneath it all, is there a fear that you're only lovable when you're needed? What would it feel like to be appreciated, not for what you do, but simply for who you are? And for the lone warrior, ask yourself why it's so hard to stop. What might catch up with you if you slowed down? And what if rest isn't actually weakness, but an opportunity to feel the things that you've been avoiding? So do you recognize the Stoic, the fixer, or the lone warrior in yourself or in the people around you? I'd love to know how these archetypes have shown up in your life, so please feel free to share your stories in the comments. If you want to go deeper into these patterns in your own chart, I offer private readings, so check below for more information. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.